Good morning, 3rd and 4th grade. We're going to read the next section of our science book. It's chapter 5, part 10, Condensation and Precipitation. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday in our science section, so let's keep going and reading about it today. We've got a verse from Psalm 65, verse 9. Thou visitest the earth and waterest it. Thou greatly enrichest it with the river of God, which is full of water. Thou preparest them corn when thou hast so provided for it. And this is talking about rain here. So, since there is water vapor in the air at all times, what causes water vapor to change back into liquid water and fall to the earth as rain? You will remember that warm air is able to hold more water vapor than cool air. Because water vapor is less dense than the other gases in air, warm air, which is moist, is also very light. The warm, moist air rises because it is less dense than either warm, dry air or cool air. As it moves further away from the Earth's surface, the warm, moist air begins to cool. And says, can you explain why this happens? What do you think? Since the air is warmed by the earth and not directly by the sun, the air moves away from its source of heat as it moves away from the earth. And so that's why as it gets higher up into the sky, it starts to cool down. As the air cools, something happens to the water vapor it is carrying. Because cool air cannot hold as much water vapor as warm air can, water vapor begins to turn back into very tiny droplets of liquid water. And this process is called condensation. And so if we look at our paper from yesterday, we had the sun heating up the water and causing it to evaporate up into the air, and it's up here, and as it rises, it starts to cool down. And that cooling starts to cause it to turn back into liquid water. So it is gas here, and then it starts to cool and turn back into liquid water, and that's called condensation. And this is the forming of clouds. So this process is called condensation, and the temperature at which water condenses is called the dew point. The dew point is not a constant temperature. It varies depending on the relative humidity of the air. So depending on how humid it is, depends on what the dew point is, and that determines at what point the water vapor starts turning back into liquid water. Water does not condense easily unless it has something on which to condense. Tiny droplets of water condense on particles of dust that are in the air. And this is how clouds are formed. So this water vapor that's up here in the air, as it rises further and further away from the Earth's surface, whether it's coming from the oceans or coming from lakes and rivers, as it rises, it starts to cool. And it starts to turn back into going from that gas, that water vapor, turning back into the liquid water. And as it cools, it needs something to condense or to basically sit on. And in the air, there's all sorts of dust particles, and so it starts to condense or cool onto those dust particles, and that starts to form our clouds. That's the process of condensation. As clouds become colder, more and more water condenses. The droplets of water bump into each other and stick together to form larger drops. When the drops of water become too large and heavy to stay in the cloud, they fall to the earth as rain. If the temperature of the air near the Earth's surface is lower than the freezing point of water, so lower than 32 degrees, sleet or snow is formed. Under certain conditions, the water droplets become hailstones. Any form of water which falls from the clouds to the earth is called precipitation. So at the point where the clouds are too heavy to hold all of the water that they have in them, we get precipitation. Usually, we think of precipitation as rain, but it also can be sleet, snow, or hailstones. So, what 4 forms of precipitation have been mentioned? I just mentioned them, so see if you can repeat them back to me. That's right, we have rain, sleet, snow, or hailstones. Precipitation falls back to earth and the water cycle continues, which is what we talked about last week here, where the water cycle just continues to go. We've got the evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and it keeps going and going and going. Now, to talk about dew and frost. Have you ever gone outside early in the morning and found the grass was wet? Yet you knew it had not rained the night before. The moisture you found on the grass was dew. Since dew does not fall from clouds in the sky, dew is not a form of precipitation. So rain, sleet, snow, hailstones, those are all forms of precipitation, but dew is not. When the sun sets, the earth and everything on earth becomes cooler. The air close to the earth begins to cool, but it does not become quite as cool as the earth because it is absorbing the earth's heat. Air touches the slightly cooler surfaces of things on the earth, such as grass and leaves, and dew forms when water vapor from the air condenses and forms droplets on these cool surfaces. And so it's kind of similar to how clouds are formed as the water droplets condense onto the dust particles that are up in the air for clouds. So the same idea, these water droplets condense on leaves or grass, and that forms our dew. Sometimes the temperature drops below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the freezing point of water. If air comes in contact with a freezing cold surface, the water vapor in the air does not condense into dew. It changes directly from a gas to a solid. The tiny crystals of ice, which are formed by frozen water vapor, are known as frost. So when it's warmer out, we get this dew, and when it's colder out, it often is frost. Have you ever seen beautiful frost pictures on your window pane after a cold night? Even if you live in a place where it does not get cold enough for frost to form outside, you may have seen frost in your refrigerator or freezer. We live in a place where it's definitely cold enough to get frost outside. We also get dew quite often in the spring and summer and fall. And then often later fall, winter, early spring, we'll sometimes get this frost. Final thing we're going to read today is the something to do, observing condensation. So remember, condensation is where that water vapor starts to cool and turn back into liquid water. To observe condensation, you will need a glass, some ice cubes, and some water. Fill the glass with ice cubes and water. Make sure that the outside of the glass is completely dry. So you want a dry cup, and you want to make sure that it's filled with water and ice. Let the glass of water stand in a warm room for a while. Notice what forms on the outside of the glass. What do you think is going to form on the outside of the glass? Where did the droplets of water come from? Those little droplets will form on the outside of the glass. Because the surface of the glass is colder than the air around it, water vapor from the air condensed and formed dew on the outside of the glass. And you may have had this happen if you've ever pulled a water bottle out of the refrigerator on a really hot day. You may have had the outside of the water bottle ends up being wet. And it's not that your water bottle is necessarily leaking. This is probably water vapor from the warm air around you is condensing down onto your actual water bottle. Have a great rest of your day.